They found me face down in the mud. No pulse, no breath. The medic called it at 03:17. 11 minutes. I was gone. Before this is over, you'll understand why. What I brought back, the names, the faces, the words spoken over my body while I lay there, couldn't have come from inside my own mind. I wasn't dreaming. I was somewhere else entirely. The last thing I remember before the darkness is the sound of a radio crackling somewhere to my left. And then, nothing. No pain, no fear, no sound of the firefight that had been tearing the air apart for the past 40 minutes, just stillness, the kind of stillness I hadn't known since childhood. I've tried to explain what happened next to doctors, to chaplains, to my wife on a cold Tuesday night, when the kids were finally asleep and the house was quiet enough for truth. None of them ever found the right words for it, and honestly, neither have I. But I'm going to try, because some things don't stay buried, and this is one of them. I'd been in country for 7 months by the time it happened. 7 months of heat and dust and the particular kind of quiet that settles over a forward operating base at 2 in the morning, the kind of quiet that feels like it's holding its breath. You learn to read that silence. You learn what it means when the dogs stop barking in the village half a mile out, or when the children who usually wave from the roadside aren't there anymore. You develop instincts that don't have names, and you trust them, because the alternative is something you don't let yourself think about. I wasn't new. I wasn't naive. I'd seen things that I spent years trying to put somewhere manageable in my mind, and I'd gotten good at it. The way soldiers get good at things they shouldn't have to be good at. You build walls, you build routines, you build a version of yourself that can function inside conditions that were never designed for human beings, and for a long time that version holds. But nothing prepares you for the moment your body decides it's done. We were on a route clearance patrol, 4 vehicles, 12 men, a stretch of road outside a small village that had been flagged as high risk for 3 weeks running. I was in the second truck. My job was to watch the right side, the fields, the tree line, the spaces between things where danger hides. It was early morning. The light was flat and grey, the kind of morning that feels like it hasn't decided what it wants to be yet. I remember thinking about coffee. That's the last ordinary thought I can recall, the specific, almost absurd detail of wanting coffee, black, the way they made it back at the FOB. And then there was a different kind of light, sharp, sudden, wrong in a way that registered somewhere below conscious thought. The blast hit the first vehicle. What came after happened fast and slow at the same time, the way these things always do. I was out of the truck before I'd made a conscious decision to move. There were men down, there was noise, the kind that fills your chest and doesn't leave room for thought. I was moving toward the lead vehicle when the secondary detonated. They tell me I was thrown approximately 8 feet. That's in the report. Patient thrown approximately 8 feet, found unresponsive. No palpable pulse. The medic who worked on me, Corporal James DeLuca, documented the loss of pulse at 03:17 hours. He recorded 11 minutes and 40 seconds of resuscitation efforts before my heart restarted. 3 defibrillation attempts, chest compressions that cracked 2 of my ribs, 11 minutes and 40 seconds. I didn't know any of this when I came to. I learned it later, piece by piece, reading a report that described what happened to my body in the flat, clinical language that makes catastrophe feel strangely distant. No spontaneous respiration. Patient, unresponsive to stimuli. Cardiac rhythm restored following third defibrillation attempt. Someone had written those words about me while I was somewhere they couldn't follow, while I was, by every measure they had available, gone. But I'm getting ahead of myself because what I need to tell you about is what happened during those 11 minutes, not what happened to my body, what happened to me. There's a difference, and that difference is the only reason I'm talking about this at all. I've never been a religious man. I want to be clear about that. I grew up in a small town in western Pennsylvania, Methodist church on Sundays, the kind of faith that sits politely in the background of a life without asking too much of you. By the time I was in my 20s, even that had faded. Not through anger or rejection, just through the slow accumulation of a life that kept me too busy to ask the questions that churches are built to answer. I believed in what I could see, what I could measure, what I could carry in my hands. That was enough for me, until it wasn't. So what happened to me in those 11 minutes didn't fit inside any framework I had. It still doesn't. What I can tell you is this. There was a moment precise and unmistakable when the darkness stopped being darkness, and something else began. Not relief, absence. There's a difference, and it matters. Relief implies you were suffering and now you're not. What I felt was something prior to that. Something that existed before the category of suffering even applied, as if pain were a language I had always spoken without knowing it, and I had simply moved somewhere that language wasn't used, somewhere the whole vocabulary of the body didn't apply. I was aware. That's the part that's hardest to explain to people who haven't been there. You expect unconsciousness to feel like sleep, like nothing. A gap, a before and an after, with nothing in between. But this wasn't nothing. I was present, I was observing, I just wasn't located the way I normally am. There was no sense of my body as a container I was living inside. There was only awareness, wide, clear, unobstructed, like a room with all the walls taken out. I could see my body. I was above it. Not floating dramatically, not hovering in the way you might imagine from a film. It was more matter-of-fact than that. I was simply at a different vantage point, the way you might step back from a painting to finally see it whole. And what I saw from that vantage point was Corporal DeLuca working on me with a particular focused urgency of someone who hasn't decided to stop yet. His hands were moving fast. The radio on his vest was crackling. Another soldier knelt beside him, applying pressure somewhere, saying something I couldn't hear, or maybe sound simply didn't reach where I was. I could see the road, the vehicles, the dust still drifting from where the blast had been, and I could see Martinez. Sergeant First Class Daniel Martinez was kneeling approximately 15 feet to my left, his hand pressed against his left shoulder, talking into a radio. I could see his mouth moving. I could see that his sleeve had been torn from the elbow down, and I could see with the same calm precision with which I could see everything else, a cut along the inside of his left forearm. Long, not deep, the kind of wound that takes a moment before it finds you. He hadn't noticed it yet. I had no way of seeing any of that from where my body lay. My body was face down in the road. DeLuca was working on my back. My field of vision, had I been inside that body looking out, would have been approximately 6 inches of gravel and dirt. But I saw Martinez. I saw the tear in his sleeve. I saw the cut. I know this because when I regained consciousness, 2 days later, in a military hospital in Landstuhl, Germany, the first thing I asked about was Martinez. The nurse looked at me with a careful, measured neutrality and told me he was fine, minor lacerations treated and released, and I asked, was there a cut on his left forearm inside of the arm, running long and shallow? And she went very still. She left the room. She came back with a doctor. I don't know what was said between them in the hallway before they walked back in. But I know the expression on that doctor's face when he sat down across from me. It was the expression of someone working to remain professionally composed while quietly revising something he thought he understood about how the world worked. He asked me how I knew about the laceration on Sergeant Martinez's arm. I told him the truth. I told him I saw it. He wrote something in his notes. He turned the page with a deliberateness that felt like a private decision. And then he moved on to the next question, and we never spoke of it directly again. But I've thought about that moment 10,000 times since, about what it means, about what it proves, and what it still can't fully explain. Because see, here's what I understood, lying in that bed in Germany with 2 cracked ribs and a mind full of things I had no language for. Whatever happened to me out there on that road wasn't a product of an oxygen-starved brain grasping for comfort. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't the kind of vision that makes sense in the dark and dissolves by morning. I was somewhere, and I was watching, and Martinez's arm was only the beginning. There was a moment, I can't say how long after, when the road began to recede. Not like a dream fading, more like a decision being made somewhere outside of me. The scene below, DeLuca, Martinez, the dust, the vehicles, it didn't disappear. It simply became less urgent. The way a conversation in another room becomes background when something more important walks through the door. And then I was somewhere else. I don't have better language than that. I've spent years looking for it, and I've come up empty. I was somewhere else. There was no transition I can account for, no tunnel, no corridor, no sense of movement through space. One moment I was above that road in Afghanistan. The next, I was somewhere that had no coordinates I could name. What I can describe is what it felt like. It felt like the moment before sleep, when the body finally lets go, but expanded, made total. Every muscle I'd been holding tight for 7 months, for my whole adult life, if I'm being honest, released at once. Not gradually, all at once. And what was underneath all that holding wasn't emptiness. It was something I don't have a word for. The closest I can get is this. Imagine the feeling of coming home after a very long time away. Not a specific home, not a house or a town, something prior to those things. The thing those things are trying to be and never quite manage. That feeling, that recognition, was everywhere at once. It wasn't coming from a direction. It was the atmosphere of where I was. I wasn't afraid. That surprised me more than anything else then and now. I am, by nature and by training, a man who plans for threat, who reads rooms, who keeps one part of his mind always on the exit. That reflex didn't fire, not once. Whatever this place was, and I'm still not certain place is the right word for it, it carried something so opposite to danger that the part of me that monitors for it simply went quiet as if that vigilance had served its purpose and was finally being released from duty. And then I became aware that I wasn't alone. I can't tell you exactly what I saw. Language keeps failing me at this particular wall, and I've stopped being frustrated by that. There was a presence. That word doesn't do it justice, but it's the most honest one I have. A presence that was oriented toward me, attending to me the way you attend to someone you've been waiting for, not with anxiety, but with a steady, unhurried certainty. I didn't recognize the form, but I recognized something else. I recognized being known. Not known the way someone knows your name or your rank or your history. Known the way your body knows its own heartbeat, without effort, without question, as something so fundamental it doesn't require acknowledgement. This presence knew me that way, and I knew in the same instant, without being told, that it had been with me before, not in this life as I understood it before. In some context I didn't have access to consciously, but that some deeper part of me recognized the way you recognize a piece of music you haven't heard in 30 years and feel in your chest before your mind catches up. That was the moment everything I thought I understood about what I was began to shift. I had spent 41 years living as though I were a body that occasionally had thoughts and feelings. What I understood in that place, without anyone explaining it, without a word being spoken, was that I had it exactly backwards. I wasn't a body that sometimes felt things deeply. I was something else entirely, something that had been wearing a body, and for 11 minutes and 40 seconds I had taken it off. The presence didn't speak. Not in any language I have letters for, but something passed between us, or was placed in me, I'm still not sure which, something that I carried back without fully understanding, a weight, a certainty, a set of things I now knew that I had no way of having learned. That's what I mean when I say what I brought back couldn't have come from inside my own mind. It didn't come from inside my mind. It came from there. Let me try to describe what knowing feels like when it doesn't come through the mind, because that's the only way I can approach what happened next. Everything I'm about to tell you arrived without process, without reasoning, without the step-by-step accumulation of evidence that I'd been trained my whole life to trust. It was simply there, the way your name is simply there when someone calls it in a crowded room. You don't construct your name in that moment, you don't decide to recognize it, you just know it. It reaches you before thought does. That's how this knowledge arrived, and the first thing I knew, the thing that landed before anything else with a force I'm still absorbing years later, was that I was not new. I don't mean that I was old, I mean that whatever I am, whatever this awareness is that looks out through my eyes and answers to my name and carries my history, it had existed before. Not in a vague or metaphorical sense, in a real one. There was a before, and in that before I had known things and carried things and lost things and come back carrying less than I started with, the way a traveller comes home lighter than they left because they gave things away along the road. Not everything, but enough. I understood this the way you understand that you are breathing, without being told, without deciding to believe it. It was simply true, and I simply knew it. And then something else arrived. There was information about my wife. I need to be careful here, because this is the part that's hardest to say plainly without sounding like someone constructing comfort from catastrophe. I understand why people hear accounts like mine and reach for that explanation first. I would have reached for it myself 2 years earlier. But what I knew in that place about Carol, my wife of 14 years, was not a feeling, not an impression, not the kind of warm reassurance a frightened mind manufactures in extremis. It was specific, concrete, a piece of information with edges. At the moment I was on that road, at 03:17 hours on a morning in October, Carol was not asleep. She was sitting at the kitchen table of our house in Fayetteville, North Carolina, in the dark. There was a cup of coffee in front of her that she hadn't drunk. She was thinking about her mother, who had passed 8 months before, and she was talking to her, out loud, alone in the dark of our kitchen in North Carolina, 7,000 miles away, talking to a woman who was gone. I knew this. Not as a guess, as a certainty without room in it for doubt. When I came home 6 weeks later, after the hospital in Germany and the one stateside, I waited. I watched Carol in the kitchen one morning and I thought about how to say it without frightening her. And finally, one night, after the kids were in bed and the house was quiet, I said, "The night I got hit, were you awake?" She looked at me in a way I will carry with me for the rest of my life. She said, "I was in the kitchen." I asked, "Were you talking to your mother?" The silence that followed was long and complete. She started crying. Not dramatically, not the way people cry in films, the way adults cry when something reaches past the walls they've spent decades building without realizing they were building them. She said she hadn't told anyone. She'd felt too foolish, sitting alone in the dark, talking out loud to a woman who wasn't there anymore. I told her what I saw. I told her what I knew. We sat at that table until past midnight, the two of us, with the lights off because neither of us thought to turn them on. That conversation broke something open in me that has never closed. Because here's the question I've been living inside ever since. The question that has quietly reorganized everything I thought I understood about what this life is and what, if anything, waits beyond it. If I could know that, if I could see Martinez's arm and know where Carol was and hear what she was saying across 7,000 miles of dark, then what else is possible? What else have we been wrong about? Coming back was the hardest part. I don't say that to be dramatic, I say it because it's the most accurate thing I know how to tell you, and accuracy matters to me more than it used to. Coming back, the return to the body, to the weight and the noise and the specific gravity of being a physical thing in a physical world was harder than anything that came before it. I felt it happen. There was no gentle transition, no slow fade in. One moment I was in that place, at the atmosphere of recognition, that presence that knew me the way I knew my own name, and the next I was slammed back into a body that was broken and cold and straining against the hands pressing down on my chest. The first sensation was pain, not the absence of pain I'd known a moment before. Pain, specific, located, undeniable. My ribs, my back, the particular agony of a body that has been worked on hard by someone who wasn't going to stop. And underneath the pain, something else. Grief. That's the word I've settled on after years of trying others. What I felt in that first moment of return was grief. Not for the men who'd been hurt on that road, not for the body I was back inside, grief for where I had just been, for the thing I could already feel receding even as I lay there with DeLuca's hands on my chest and someone's voice in my ear telling me to stay. As if the knowing, all of it, everything that had been placed in me was water I could feel running through my hands the moment I was back inside a body with hands. I couldn't hold it all. And that loss, that specific, immediate loss of something I'd only just found, was the first thing I felt in this life again. That's something nobody tells you in the accounts I've read since, and I've read many, looking for someone who described it the way it actually was. They tell you what they saw and what they understood. They don't always tell you what it cost to come back, what it felt like to be returned to a life that suddenly seemed both unbearably precious and terrifyingly small at the same time. The hospital in Germany was clean and quiet and completely incomprehensible to me. I lay in that bed and watched nurses move in and out and thought, they don't know. Not one person in this building knows what I just came from. I wasn't sure whether to feel sorry for them or grateful. I couldn't hold either feeling long before it dissolved into the exhaustion of a body that has been broken and reconstructed against its preferences. I stopped talking much. My commanding officer visited. My chaplain visited. I said the right things and answered the right questions and let people conclude I was processing trauma in the expected ways. Because the alternative, trying to explain what actually happened, felt like reaching for a language I didn't have the vocabulary for yet. And I was afraid that if I said it out loud too soon, it would diminish. I'd seen how the world handles things it can't measure. I'd watched the doctor turn the page, so I kept it close, carried it the way you carry something fragile through a crowd, carefully, with both hands, not looking anywhere else. What I couldn't keep quiet was the way everything looked different, people especially. I'd look at someone, a nurse, another patient, a soldier, passing in the hallway, and feel something I couldn't name. A kind of weight to them, as if I could sense without being able to articulate it that they were carrying something much larger than their body suggested. That behind the face and the uniform and the particular biography of this one human life, there was something vast and ongoing that had existed long before this version of them had a name. It wasn't pity. It wasn't superiority. It was recognition. The same recognition I'd felt when the presence turned toward me in that place without coordinates. And it raised a question I haven't been able to put down since, one that cuts closer than all the others, one that follows me into ordinary days and sits down at the table with me when I'm not paying attention. If what I experienced in those 11 minutes is real, if we are all something that vast, something that old, something that continuous, then what are we doing with the time we have here? That question changed the way I lived. Not immediately, not in the clean, cinematic way that transformation happens in stories where a man has an experience and walks out of it completely remade. Real change moves slower than that. It seeps. It works on you from the inside over months and years, until one day you look at the decisions you're making and the things you're holding and the things you've let go of, and you realize something has shifted that you can't fully account for. But it changed. I changed. The first thing to go was the anger. I'd carried a low-grade anger for most of my adult life. Nothing dramatic, nothing that showed clearly. The kind that sits in your chest and expresses itself as impatience, as a short fuse in traffic, as a tendency to keep score without admitting you're keeping score. I set it down sometime in the year after I came home, and I've never picked it back up. Not because I decided to, because it stopped feeling like mine. The second thing was the fear of dying. That one surprised me more because I'd never thought of myself as a man afraid of dying. Soldiers make a certain peace with mortality early. But what I understood, lying in that bed in Germany, was that I'd had a background hum of it my whole life, a low, persistent anxiety about ending that I'd been managing rather than examining. It's gone now. Not replaced by recklessness, replaced by something quieter, a settled confidence in the continuity of things that I can't prove to anyone else, but that I carry with the same certainty I carry my own name. I talked to a few people over the years, not many, a chaplain at Fort Bragg who listened without interrupting, which is rarer than it sounds, a man I met at a veterans support group who'd had his own experience in Fallujah. Different details, same essential shape. We talked for 3 hours over bad coffee and parted without exchanging numbers. And I've thought about that conversation many times since. A woman at a conference on consciousness research who didn't look at me with the particular expression doctors use when they're managing something rather than actually engaging with it, and one other person. My father, 3 weeks before he died. He'd been declining for 2 years, his heart, slow and stubborn about it the way he was stubborn about everything. I flew home for what I understood would probably be the last visit. On the second night, I sat with him in a room he'd slept in for 40 years, and I told him everything. The road, the stillness, the presence, Martinez's arm, Carol in the kitchen, the grief of coming back into a body. He didn't say much. My father was not a man who had words for emotional territory. He'd built his whole life out of practical things, his hands, his tools, his routines, the satisfying click of problems solved. But when I finished talking, he was quiet for a long time. And then he said, "Do you think it's the same for everyone?" I said I didn't know. He said, "But you think something's there?" I said yes, without hesitation. Whatever I'd lost of that experience in the shock of returning, that certainty had held. It was the one piece that hadn't run through my hands. He nodded. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, and then he said, "Good." That was all. Good. He died 11 days later, on a Tuesday morning while I was somewhere over the Atlantic on a flight back. I've thought about that conversation more than almost any other in my life. About what he was really asking, about what it meant for a man like him, practical, unsentimental, built entirely out of things he could see and hold, to receive that word, that certainty, and simply nod and say, "Good." I think he needed to hear it. I think a lot of people need to hear it, which is why I'm finally saying it out loud after years of carrying it mostly alone. Because there is one more thing, one piece of what happened on that road that I've told almost no one. The thing the presence actually communicated directly, unmistakably in a way I have no word for, but have never doubted. The thing that explains why I said at the beginning that what I brought back couldn't have come from inside my own mind. It's not about Martinez. It's not about Carol in the kitchen. It's something else entirely. And it changes everything I've said so far. The presence communicated something to me about Corporal DeLuca. I've held that sentence inside me for years without saying it out loud. Not because I doubted it. I have never doubted it, not for a single day across the years since that road. But because it's the piece that asks the most of whoever is listening. Martinez's arm, Carol, in the kitchen. Those are verifiable, but they belong to me. They're about my life and the people in it. What the presence showed me about DeLuca is different. It belongs to someone else's life. And for a long time I felt I had no right to carry it publicly, that I needed his permission before it became a story I could tell. He gave me that permission. In Columbus, Ohio, on a rainy Wednesday in March, 4 years after the day he kept me alive. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you what I was shown first. In the moment, DeLuca was working on me, his hands on my chest, the radio on his vest cutting through static, the dust still drifting on that road. He was not running through protocol. He was not counting compressions. He was thinking about his son. His son's name is Marcus. He was 4 years old at the time. And 3 weeks before that patrol, Marcus had been diagnosed with something serious enough that DeLuca had submitted a formal request to be reassigned stateside. The request was still pending. Nobody on that patrol knew. It wasn't the kind of thing you talked about in the field. It was the kind of thing you carried alone in a locked room inside yourself and took out only in the dark when no one was watching. But I knew. The presence didn't explain how, it simply showed me, the way it had shown me Carol at the kitchen table with that same calm, specific, edgeless certainty. I saw DeLuca's hands, I understood what was moving through him, and I understood, without anyone saying a word, that the decision he was making in that moment were connected to me in a way I could feel but couldn't yet fully name. A decision to not stop, to keep going one more time, not because the protocol required it, because something required it. If you've made it this far with me, subscribe to the channel. News stories like this one every week. I found DeLuca 4 years later. He'd separated from the army by then, moved back to Ohio to be near his family. I wrote him a letter first, short, careful. I said I wanted to thank him properly and that there was something I needed to tell him. He wrote back within a week. We met at a diner outside Columbus, grey sky, the kind of March cold that finds its way inside a jacket, no matter how good the jacket is. We spent the first hour the way men like us spend the first hour, talking around things, finding the shape of the territory before moving toward the center of it. And then I told him what I knew. I told him about Marcus, about the diagnosis, about the pending request, about what had been moving through him with his hands on my chest on that road in October. He didn't say anything for a long time. He looked at his coffee. He looked at the table. He looked at me. Then he said, "Who told you?" I said, "Nobody told me." And I explained, as clearly as I could, sitting in that booth with rain starting against the windows, what I've explained here, the 11 minutes, what I saw, what I was shown. He was quiet for a while after that, the kind of quiet that isn't empty, the kind that has weight and texture that you can feel on your skin. And then he said something I will carry for the rest of my life. He said, "Marcus is fine." He said it the way you say a sentence that has been a prayer for 4 years and has finally, in the most unexpected place imaginable, been received. Marcus is fine. He's 9 now. He plays soccer. He wants to be a marine biologist. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that wouldn't have made the moment smaller than it was. DeLuca looked at me across that table and said quietly, "I thought about stopping." He didn't say when, he didn't need to. "I thought about stopping," he said, and something told me not to. I asked if he knew what that something was. He held my eyes for a long moment, and then he said, "I think I do now." I've been asked more than once what I think the presence was. People want a name for it, a category, something that fits inside the frameworks they already have: God, the universe, the subconscious, the collective memory of the species, a hallucination produced by specific neurological conditions. I understand the need. I had the same need for a long time. The mind wants a shelf to put things on. It's uncomfortable living with something that doesn't have one. But I've made my peace with the discomfort. What I know, what I carry now as something closer to bone than to belief, is this: there is something on the other side of the body, something that knew me before I knew myself, something that was present on a road in Afghanistan at 0317 hours and showed a man with broken ribs things he had no way of knowing, and left him with a certainty that has not wavered in the years since. Whether that something has a name, I don't know. Whether it matches the name you already have for it, I can't say. What I can say is that it was real, it was specific, and it was not indifferent. That last part is the one that stays with me most. Not the knowledge it gave me, the arm, the kitchen, the boy named Marcus. Those are extraordinary, but they are in some sense evidence, proof, and proof, by its nature, argues. What I keep returning to is the quality of the attention. The presence wasn't observing me the way a scientist observes a subject or the way a judge observes a case. It was attending to me the way. And I've spent years looking for the right comparison, the way you hold something you are about to let go of, but not yet, with a care that doesn't need to announce itself, with a patience that has no edge. It knew I was going back. I understood that without being told. The whole of that encounter, the stillness, the recognition, the knowing, existed inside the frame of a return. I was not staying. I was being prepared to go back and carry something. The details about Martinez, about Carol, about DeLuca, those weren't gifts. They were proof of concept. They were the present saying, you were here. This was real. Don't let the world talk you out of it, and it hasn't. My father is gone now. Martinez retired and coaches high school football in Texas. Carol and I still sit at that kitchen table, sometimes with the lights off, sometimes not, and talk about her mother the way you eventually learn to talk about the dead. Not with grief exactly, but with a kind of ongoing conversation that doesn't require their physical presence to continue. DeLuca sends a photo of Marcus every year around October. Soccer uniform, muddy knees, grinning in the way of a 9-year-old who has no idea how much weight his existence carries for two men who met on a road in Afghanistan. I look at that photo every year, and every year I think about what it means that I was shown him, that in 11 minutes and 40 seconds on a road where I had no pulse and no breath and no visible future, something thought it was important enough to show me a 4-year-old boy in Ohio so that I would know when I came back that the man who kept me here had a reason to be kept too. That's not random, that's not noise, that's not the brain generating comfort in the dark. That's something caring about the specific gravity of individual lives, caring about DeLuca and Marcus, caring about Carol in her kitchen, caring about a man in western Pennsylvania who needed to hear one word before he died, good, and getting it. I don't know what to call that, but I know what it feels like to have been inside it, even briefly, even at the cost of 2 cracked ribs and 40 years of trying to find the language. It feels like being known, and I believe, with everything I brought back from that road, that you are known that way too, right now, exactly as you are. There are others who came back, each one with something different, something that doesn't fit the world as we've agreed to understand it. If you want to hear them, you know where to find us. Subscribe to the channel, and if this reached something in you, leave it a like. It's the smallest thing, and it carries more than you know.